Li Hao sat in the cramped control room of the power plant, staring at the blinking red lights on the monitor in front of him. His fingers were poised over the keyboard, but his mind was elsewhere. Outside the glass window, a hum of machines and the occasional low whir of turbines filled the air. The plant was always busy, always noisy, but it was a world Li Hao knew well. He had been an electrical engineer for the last 5 years, working his way up from intern to the go-to problem solver for every malfunction. In a way, he was a cog in the machinery, just like all the others. But that night, something unexpected happened. The alarm blared, a shrill, urgent tone that was meant to signal an emergency. Power surge on grid 3, the speaker crackled. All hands to grid 3. Immediate action required. Li Hao cursed under his breath. Another surge, probably another fault in the system. Nothing too unusual, just another day in the life of an engineer. But as he raced to the control room where the grid's controls were located, he noticed something strange. The air felt thick, almost static, like the atmosphere itself was charged. He could feel it, like a hum in his bones, pulling at him as he hurried down the long corridor to the power grid. As he entered the control room, a technician waved him over. "We have a major fault at the high-voltage line. Can't stabilize it. Everything's going haywire." Li Hao nodded, rolling up his sleeves. He had dealt with worse. He was the man who fixed things when no one else could, the genius with the tools and the instincts to make things right. His team stood back as he grabbed the control panel and started flipping switches, rerouting power, adjusting the flow to stabilize the system. The machinery hummed, but there was something unsettling about it. The vibrations under his hands felt wrong. Too much power surging through the system. He could feel it, even through his gloves, like an electric pulse coursing through the air, straight into his fingertips. "Li Hao," a voice shouted from behind him, but it was drowned out by the rising crescendo of the hum. His fingers trembled over the controls as a new wave of pressure hit him, something too strong to ignore. He had to get it under control. Now, the surge slammed into him like a freight train, and for a moment, everything went black. Li Hao woke with a start. His vision blurred, his head spinning as the overpowering scent of ozone filled his nostrils. His skin tingled with the aftershock of the explosion. He felt different. The control room around him was in chaos, with workers running back and forth, but everything seemed strangely muted, like a dream. He sat up slowly, his head pounding. Then, without thinking, he reached out and placed his hand on the control panel again, and everything froze. The lights in the room flickered, then steadied. The hum in the air died down. Every electronic device, every gauge, every monitor, all fell silent as though the very essence of electricity had paused. Li Hao looked around, blinking, confused. His pulse raced, his body shaking with adrenaline. What was happening? Why could he feel the pulse of the machines, like his own heartbeat? And then, without warning, the lights came back on, and everything resumed. But the moment had shifted. The technician who had been shouting at him before stared, wide-eyed. "How did you do that?" Li Hao didn't know. He couldn't explain it, but as his hand hovered above the panel, he could feel the flow of electricity like it was a living thing, pulsing, waiting to be commanded. He thought about fixing the malfunctioning power supply, and with a barely perceptible shift in his thoughts, the machinery whirred back into action. The technician blinked. "What just happened?" "It's working again." Li Hao stood up slowly, his hands still trembling. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice distant. "I don't know." For the next few days, Li Hao tried to shake off what had happened. He chalked it up to the after-effects of the accident, maybe some kind of electrical shock that had messed with his nervous system. But as he went about his daily work, the odd sensation wouldn't leave him. He could still feel it, an undercurrent, a hum in the air. Every time he touched a piece of equipment, it felt like he could hear its pulse, like it was communicating with him. The sensation was strange, powerful, almost overwhelming. One afternoon, Li Hao was sitting in his tiny office, reviewing a blueprint for the next maintenance schedule when his phone buzzed. He picked it up and saw a notification flash across the screen: power failure, grid 8. A sense of foreboding gripped him. It was as though he already knew what was happening. He stood up without hesitation, grabbing his jacket. As he walked out of the building, he could feel the electric charge in the air, pulsing stronger with each step. When he arrived at grid 8, he found a scene of utter chaos. The power was out, and the entire section of the city was dark, save for the dim glow of emergency lights. Technicians and workers ran around trying to get the grid back online, but nothing seemed to be working. They were overwhelmed. "Li Hao," someone called from the crowd. "We need you. We can't figure it out." He walked up to the control panel, glancing at the frenzied workers. His fingers brushed against the metal surface, and instantly, he could feel the malfunction. He closed his eyes, focusing, concentrating, trying to sense the problem. The electrical current was erratic, disorganized, like a fractal pattern spinning out of control. Without thinking, Li Hao reached out, his hand hovering just over the panel. The hum in the air grew louder, and he felt a surge of power flood through his fingertips. He closed his eyes, and the grid flickered back to life. Lights blinked on across the neighborhood. The hum of the electricity returned, smooth and steady, like it was meant to be. The workers around him cheered, clapping him on the back, but Li Hao didn't hear them. He was too focused on the way the energy had responded to him. He could control it now. Not just fix things, but control it. Days passed, and Li Hao's newfound ability became more pronounced. He began to experiment, subtly at first, controlling small machines, fixing broken circuits, manipulating signals from far away. He could fix an entire power grid without ever touching a single wire. He could feel the patterns of energy as if they were a living organism. It was as though the world was filled with invisible currents, and he was the only one who could see them, control them, and bend them to his will. But with power came a gnawing sense of danger. As Li Hao's abilities grew stronger, he began to notice things he hadn't before. He could sense the hidden electrical signals running through the walls of buildings, through the personal devices people carried around. He could feel the pulse of their phones, the quiet hum of their laptops, even the faint electric current running through the bodies of those around him. He could control it all, if he wanted to. He realized something unsettling: it wasn't just the electrical grids he had power over. It was everything. As the days wore on, Li Hao began to push the limits of his abilities. It wasn't just about fixing things anymore, it was about understanding the machines, feeling their energy, and bending it to his will. He started tinkering with everyday electronics, at first out of curiosity. He turned off the lights in his apartment just by thinking about it. He interfered with the Wi-Fi signal in a cafe, causing everyone's phones to suddenly flash the same meme, repeatedly. At first, it was funny. But then, as he did it more, the consequences grew darker. He had no control over it, not yet. Sometimes, the interference would last for hours, causing confusion, frustration, and chaos in the places he visited. He didn't mean for it to happen, but it seemed like the current itself was calling to him, urging him to do more. Li Hao didn't understand what was happening to him, but he knew one thing: the power was addictive. He could feel it deep in his bones, like a quiet hum that never went away. Every time he focused, the energy responded to him. He could turn lights on or off, manipulate signals, even control machines from a distance. But it wasn't enough to just fix things. It wasn't enough to make everything work. No, it felt like the current was calling him to something greater, something far beyond anything he had imagined. One afternoon, as he sat in his apartment, absent-mindedly flipping through some technical papers, his phone rang. It was an unknown number, but he picked it up anyway, wondering who it could be. "Li Hao," the voice on the other end said, low and urgent. "We need you. The government is aware of what you can do." Li Hao froze. His heart raced, and his palms began to sweat. He hadn't told anyone about his abilities, at least not anyone who could have exposed him. The only people who knew were the workers at the plant, and even they thought it was some freak accident. Yet somehow, someone knew. Someone had figured it out. "What do you want?" Li Hao asked, trying to sound calm, though his mind was already racing with possibilities. "You don't understand," the voice continued. "You're not the only one with powers. There are others, people who have been experimented on, people like you, and the government knows about us. They want to control us." Li Hao's breath hitched. He was being hunted, and he had no idea why or by whom. He tried to keep his voice steady as he replied, "Who are you? We don't have time for introductions. Listen to me, you need to get out of there, right now. The government is coming for you. They'll use your abilities to their advantage, and once they have you, you'll never be free." The line went dead before Li Hao could ask any more questions. He sat there for a long moment, the weight of the words sinking in. He had known, deep down, that this was coming. Power like his wasn't something that could be ignored. Someone, somewhere, was always watching, always looking for ways to exploit it. He didn't waste time thinking about what to do next. The government would be after him soon, and he needed to be prepared. Grabbing his coat, he made his way out of the apartment, his mind already racing. He had no real plan, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't stay where he was. The streets outside were bustling with people, but Li Hao felt disconnected, like he was moving through a world that didn't belong to him anymore. Everywhere he looked, he could feel the electric pulse of the city. It was in the streetlights, the traffic signals, the advertisements flashing on the side of the buildings. It was in everything, and it was as though the city itself was alive, waiting for him to make his next move. His phone buzzed again, and he glanced down. It was a message from an unknown number. "You're running out of time. Head east to the industrial district. Someone will meet you there. Don't trust anyone, not even the government." Li Hao didn't hesitate. He turned on his heel and made his way to the subway, his mind still swirling with questions. The industrial district was on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling maze of factories and warehouses. It was the perfect place to disappear, or so he hoped. As the subway train rumbled beneath the city, Li Hao's thoughts turned dark. He had no idea who this mysterious person was, or what they wanted from him, but something told him he didn't have many options. The world he had known, the world of wires and grids, was now a prison. He had become a weapon, and he didn't know how to stop it. The train screeched to a halt, and Li Hao stepped out into the dimly lit station. The air here was thick with the smell of oil and metal, and the sounds of industry filled the streets. He could feel the vibrations underfoot, the hum of machinery just beneath the surface of the concrete. The city had always been a place of power, but now it felt like it was swallowing him whole. He walked quickly, his footsteps echoing in the empty streets as he made his way toward the warehouse district. The message had been clear: someone was waiting for him, someone who could help him navigate this new world of power and control. But who? And how could he trust them? His mind raced with possibilities. The government? A rival corporation? The voice on the phone? It could be anyone, and Li Hao didn't know who to trust anymore. All he knew was that he had to keep moving, keep ahead of whatever was coming for him. The industrial district was eerily quiet as he approached the designated meeting point, a dilapidated warehouse on the edge of the district. The doors were rusted, the windows boarded up. It looked like the kind of place where people went to disappear. Li Hao's heart pounded as he approached, his senses on high alert. He could feel the electrical currents in the air, buzzing with a nervous energy. He wasn't sure what to expect, but something told him that whatever happened next would change everything. He pushed open the creaky door, stepping into the dimly lit interior. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he saw a figure standing at the far end of the warehouse, silhouetted against the faint light coming from a cracked window. "Li Hao," the voice called, low and calm. "I'm glad you made it." The figure stepped forward, revealing a tall woman with sharp features and piercing eyes. Her face was familiar, though Li Hao couldn't quite place where he had seen her before. "You're one of them," Li Hao said, his voice tinged with suspicion. "One of the people the government's been hunting." The woman smiled, though it wasn't a reassuring smile. "I was once. But now, I'm something else. Something more." Li Hao frowned. "What do you mean?" The woman stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You've been changed, Li Hao. That accident you had wasn't just an accident. It was part of something much larger, something the government and corporations have been working on for years. You're part of a new breed of people, people who can control the world's power." Li Hao felt a chill run down his spine. "And what do you want from me?" "We need you, Li Hao," she said, her voice growing more urgent. "The government is after us. They want to use our abilities to control the entire global infrastructure. They want to turn us into weapons. But we won't let them. We need to fight back, before it's too late." Li Hao didn't know what to say. He had only just started to understand what was happening to him, and now, this woman was asking him to join some kind of underground resistance. But her words resonated with him. The government, the corporations, they were all playing a game with people's lives, using them as pawns. Li Hao had never felt like a pawn, but now, as he stood in the dim light of the warehouse, he wasn't so sure. "Tell me more," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" The woman's eyes gleamed in the low light. "We're going to stop them. We're going to take back control. And we're going to start with you." Li Hao stood motionless in the shadows of the warehouse, the weight of the woman's words hanging in the air like a palpable presence. He didn't know what to make of it, didn't know how much of it was truth and how much was manipulation. But somewhere deep inside, a flicker of something ignited. A feeling that maybe this was more than just about him. More than just about the strange, terrifying power that had surged through his body. It was about something bigger, something far bigger than the government, or the corporations that had been sniffing around him. This was about control. And he wasn't sure he wanted to be controlled anymore. "You're right," the woman continued, her voice steady but carrying a sense of urgency. "They've been watching you. They've been watching all of us. There are others like you, with powers they don't fully understand, but they know one thing: they want to harness that power. They want to turn us into their tools." She stepped closer, and Li Hao instinctively took a step back, though he couldn't explain why. It was as if his own instincts, sharpened by the electricity flowing through him, were screaming at him to be cautious. But he couldn't run away. "Not this time. I don't want to be anyone's tool," Li Hao said, his voice low but resolute. He felt his fingertips tingle, as if the current that ran through him was pushing him toward an answer he didn't yet have. The woman nodded, her face hardening. "Neither do we. That's why we need your help. You can feel the current, can't you? You understand it in ways that no one else can. You have the power to do what no one else can." He didn't want to admit it, but she was right. He had felt it, the electricity, the control, the potential. He could do things with it that defied reason. Fix things, disrupt things, create things out of nothing. He could hear the hum of every device in the world, from the quiet flicker of a light bulb to the vast pulse of power grids that ran across cities. He could manipulate all of it. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and fascinating all at once. "So, what are you saying?" Li Hao asked, narrowing his eyes. "You want me to help you fight back? Against the government?" The woman's gaze hardened. "The government, the corporations, this entire system is built on exploiting power, not just the electrical kind. You're not the only one with abilities. There are others, all over the world, and they're being hunted, used as weapons, as tools. But we've been fighting back. Quietly. We've been taking out their experiments one by one, disrupting their plans." Li Hao thought about it for a moment. He wasn't sure if he believed everything she said, but there was something in her eyes, something desperate, something that rang true. She wasn't lying. She couldn't have been. I don't know anything about a resistance, Li Hao said, shaking his head. I've just been trying to control this thing that's inside me. Trying not to lose myself. She studied him for a moment, her lips pressed into a thin line. You're already lost, she said softly. But you can choose where to go from here. The word struck him harder than he expected. He'd been afraid of the power, afraid of what it meant. But the truth was, he had already lost himself. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that power plant days ago. His world had shifted, his very being had shifted. And now, it seemed like the only choice he had was to move forward. So, what do you want me to do? Li Hao asked. The woman's eyes brightened. There's a convoy leaving tonight, carrying high-tech equipment. It's meant for military contractors, but we're going to intercept it. That equipment is key to understanding what they've been planning with people like you. With us. And once we have it, we can start to take back control. Li Hao hesitated. This wasn't just about fixing power grids anymore. This was about something far more dangerous. And yet, he felt the pull to act. He couldn't sit idly by anymore. He couldn't pretend that he wasn't a part of this larger scheme. He had the power. And if he didn't do something now, he'd lose it to those who would abuse it. I'm in, he said, his voice firm. The woman's face softened, but only for a moment. Then she turned and walked toward the door at the back of the warehouse. Come on then, she called. Let's go. We have a long night ahead. The convoy wasn't far, but it was heavily guarded. Li Hao could feel the power surging through the air as they approached, the faint buzz of electricity practically humming in the atmosphere. The woman, who had introduced herself as Mei, moved with calculated precision. She knew the layout of the area, knew exactly where to strike. Li Hao followed her, his heart racing, every nerve on edge. They ducked behind a large shipping container, and Mei handed him a small device, the size of a thick pen. It had wires sticking out of it and a small screen that flickered intermittently. This will let you access their systems. We need you to disable the security grid around the convoy. If we're going to make this work, we have to be quick. Li Hao nodded, though his mind was racing. Disabling the security systems was easy enough for him. The challenge was not being detected. But as he glanced up at the convoy, 6 military trucks, each one guarded by armed soldiers, he realized that getting through their defenses wasn't going to be as simple as just turning off a few cameras. I'll handle it, he said, his voice steady despite the surge of anxiety flooding through him. Mei's eyes flicked to him, her expression unreadable. You sure? Li Hao didn't answer. Instead, he focused. He reached out, feeling the faint pulse of energy that surrounded the convoy. The cameras, the drones, the barriers, they were all connected. All it would take was one nudge. One flicker of his will. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let the current flow through him. At first, it felt like a ripple in the air, almost nothing at all. But as he concentrated, it grew stronger, more intense. He could feel the lines of electricity in the security systems, the heartbeat of the convoy's defenses. He reached deeper, beyond the outer layer of protection, until the pulse grew louder, until it was a roar in his ears. With a thought, he snapped it. The surge of energy coursed through the systems, the alarms immediately silencing, the cameras turning to static. It was done. He opened his eyes to find Mei looking at him with a strange mixture of awe and calculation. Without a word, she moved forward, her footsteps confident as she approached the convoy. Li Hao followed, his senses heightened. The air around him crackled with energy, and he could feel the weight of the power at his fingertips. But now, as they approached the convoy and the adrenaline began to build, a different kind of pressure settled over him. This wasn't just about power anymore. This was about taking control of his own fate. His next move would determine everything. The next hour felt like a blur. Mei and Li Hao moved quickly, efficiently, disabling the guards and securing the equipment they needed. Every action, every decision felt more urgent than the last. Li Hao's mind was sharp, his senses on high alert as he manipulated the electrical systems, keeping them hidden from the soldiers and the military-grade surveillance. By the time they had everything they came for, it was already dawn. The convoy was in chaos, the guards disoriented and confused. And Li Hao, for the first time, felt a sense of control that he hadn't realized he was missing. They made their way back to the warehouse, the quiet of the early morning surrounding them. The air felt heavy, as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Li Hao felt the electric hum in his veins, stronger now, pulsing with the knowledge that whatever path he chose from here on out, there would be no going back. The woman, Mei, looked at him as they approached the warehouse doors. "We have what we need. But this is only the beginning. They'll come after us, and they'll come harder next time. But we'll be ready." Li Hao nodded, the weight of her words settling in. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure: he had made his choice. He wasn't going to be controlled by anyone. He wasn't going to let them turn him into a weapon. He was going to fight back, and he would do it on his own terms.